The wedding of the century was about to take place, with glistening chandeliers and flowers filling the grand hall. The air was thick with excitement and anticipation. But for Sarah, the maid of honor, the day was about to take an unexpected turn. She had known the bride, Emily, since childhood, and had always been her closest friend. But when Emily's father, Mr. James, a well-known tycoon, approached her with an offer, it was impossible to turn down. "Sarah," he said, lowering his voice, "I need you to do something for me, something that only you can do." He handed her a check for $1 million. "All you have to do is kiss the groom during the vows. It's a gesture of trust, and I'll ensure it's kept between us. No one will know." For a moment, Sarah stood frozen. The sum was unimaginable. She thought of her debts, her struggles, the way her family had always struggled to make ends meet. She thought of her mother, bedridden in the hospital, and the overwhelming hospital bills that seemed to grow with each passing day. Mr. James knew all this. He had always been aware of Sarah's difficult background. He knew that she had been using every bit of her savings, every resource she could muster, to take care of her mother's medical expenses. Her family had never been wealthy, and now, with mounting debts, Sarah was caught in a web of financial strain that she couldn't escape. The temptation was overwhelming. The money, the lifestyle it promised, was irresistible. But the consequences, what would this mean for her friendship with Emily? For her reputation? Would she be able to face the consequences of her actions? Sarah was torn. It was a deal that offered a way out of her financial nightmare, but it could cost her everything she had ever cared about. Sarah accepted the check with shaky hands, feeling the weight of the $1 million sum pressing down on her. It felt surreal, as if she were dreaming, but the reality of the cold, hard check in her palm was undeniable. She looked up at Mr. James, her mind swirling with 1,000 questions. "Why me?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Why do you want me to kiss the groom?" Mr. James leaned in, his voice low and deliberate. "I want to stop the wedding," he said, his eyes darkening with an emotion Sarah couldn't quite place. "I didn't approve of it in the first place, and Emily was stubborn. She refused to listen, and now, well, this is the only way." Sarah's heart raced. Stop the wedding? The idea seemed impossible. She could feel the weight of the moment. She wanted to press for more details, wanted to know why he hated the groom so much, but she hesitated. There was something in Mr. James's demeanor that told her this wasn't just about a wedding. There was something deeper at play, something he wasn't saying. "Why don't you just tell Emily the truth?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "If you don't approve of the groom, why not tell her?" Mr. James's gaze hardened. "It's not that simple, Sarah," he muttered, his eyes briefly flicking away. "Trust me, this is for the best. Emily's too headstrong. She wouldn't understand." He paused, looking Sarah squarely in the eyes. "I know you need the money. This is the price. Take it or leave it." Sarah swallowed, the lump in her throat growing. The money, it was everything she had dreamed of. But her loyalty to Emily tugged at her heart, making her feel like she was betraying her best friend. She glanced at the check again. $1 million. It could cover her mother's bills for the rest of her life. It could give her a future that was no longer defined by debt. But what would it cost her in the end? As she stood there, staring at the check, Sarah could almost hear the sound of her conscience screaming at her to walk away. But the desperate need for relief from her mother's suffering, relief from the weight of her own life, made the decision harder and harder to ignore. She took a deep breath and nodded, her voice barely audible. "I'll do it." Sarah was the one helping Emily hold her veil, the one to clean her face when she sweat, the one to stand beside her during the vows. She had been there for every important moment of Emily's life, comforting her during heartbreaks, supporting her through family troubles, and celebrating the happiest occasions together. Today, she was supposed to be Emily's biggest supporter as the woman she loved walked down the aisle to marry the man she had chosen. But instead, Sarah felt the weight of a secret so heavy, it seemed to threaten to crush everything she had known about loyalty and friendship. The day of the wedding arrived. Sarah stood backstage in the luxurious dressing room, the cold $1 million check still tucked into her purse. The pressure weighed on her shoulders. She had been Emily's best friend for years, a constant presence in her life. How could she betray her like this? But the money, it would change everything. It could heal the scars of her financial struggles, take away the never-ending worry of her mother's medical bills, and finally offer her a taste of the life she had always dreamed of. As Sarah stared at her reflection in the mirror, doubt crept into her mind. Her eyes, usually filled with warmth and joy when around Emily, now looked haunted. She was about to step into a role no one could have anticipated. She was supposed to be the best friend, the one who stood by Emily's side as she began this new chapter of her life, yet here she was, poised to destroy that very trust with a single, seemingly innocent kiss. The ceremony began. The soft hum of the organ filled the air, and Sarah could hear the rustle of the crowd as the first notes of the wedding march echoed through the hall. Emily's entrance was as breathtaking as Sarah had imagined. The moment the bride appeared at the end of the aisle, Sarah's heart twisted in her chest. Emily was radiant, glowing in her wedding gown, her eyes sparkling with love for the man who would soon be her husband. The smile on Emily's face was the same one Sarah had always seen, the smile of a woman so sure of her future. But now, Sarah could barely look at her without the guilt threatening to suffocate her. As Emily walked toward the altar, Sarah's thoughts scattered in a chaotic blur. She was supposed to hold Emily's veil, to be the one to make sure the bride looked perfect. She was supposed to be the one to smile, reassure Emily, and support her in this monumental moment. Instead, she felt like an outsider, detached from the reality of the situation, trapped in her own decisions. Yet, all Sarah could think about was the groom, Ben. Handsome, successful, and the man she was now about to kiss. He stood at the altar, looking every bit the charming, well-put-together man everyone believed him to be. His smile, though, seemed different to Sarah. It was too calculated, too perfect, just like the carefully constructed life he seemed to lead. She had always been able to read people, and Ben's eyes, no matter how sincere his smile, told her something else. The way his gaze flickered over to her as she stood at the altar, his brow furrowing slightly, it made Sarah question the depth of his commitment to Emily. But none of that mattered now. Her role in the wedding had already been set. All she had to do was kiss him during the vows and make it look like part of the ceremony. The organ music reached its peak, and the vows were about to begin. Sarah's hands trembled as she reached for Emily's veil. Her palms were sweaty, and her heart pounded in her chest as she moved toward the altar. She caught Emily's eye for a split second. There was an unspoken trust in that look. Sarah was supposed to be the pillar of support, the one Emily leaned on in her moment of happiness. Instead, she felt like a fraud, a traitor in disguise. As Emily stood beside Ben, Sarah couldn't stop the whirlwind of thoughts crashing through her mind. She had been by Emily's side for so long, seen the love between them, witnessed the joy they shared, and yet here she was about to ruin it all. She glanced at Ben once more. The task was clear. He was to be kissed, and the wedding would proceed as planned. But as Sarah's gaze lingered on his face, an uncomfortable realization washed over her. She wasn't just betraying Emily in that moment. She was betraying herself, her values, everything that had once seemed unshakable. With every passing second, the weight of what she was about to do became unbearable, but there was no turning back. The guests were waiting. The ceremony was unfolding. And Sarah was caught in a trap of her own making. She took a deep breath, steeled herself, and prepared to do what she had been told, regardless of the storm of guilt brewing inside her. When it came time for the vows, everything felt like a blur. The air was thick with emotion, and the room seemed to hold its breath as Emily and Ben exchanged words of love and commitment. Their voices were filled with promises of forever, promises that seemed so genuine, so full of hope, that Sarah's heart ached. She had witnessed the connection between them, had seen how Emily's eyes sparkled whenever she looked at Ben, and how Ben always seemed to be completely enraptured by her. It was supposed to be the happiest moment of their lives, yet Sarah felt a growing sense of unease. As the vows were nearing their end, Sarah stood frozen beside the couple, her hands trembling at her sides. Her mind raced, unable to stop the inevitable. The words of Mr. James echoed in her ears, "Just kiss him, and everything will be over." But was it really that simple? Was this kiss really going to solve everything? The room fell into a tense silence, every eye on Emily and Ben. And then, the priest's voice cut through the air, commanding attention from all those present. "You may kiss your bride," the priest said, his words punctuating the moment, making the room hum with anticipation. This was it. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest, and the world around her seemed to slow down. Her thoughts scattered, replaced by the single, relentless focus of what she had to do next. She stepped forward. With a swift motion, Sarah pressed her lips to Ben's. The kiss was quick, almost too quick, an unplanned jolt of electricity that surged through her, making her skin tingle. It was as though the world around her had frozen, yet her heart felt as if it was beating at 1,000 miles per hour. The kiss was a momentary shock, an abrupt interruption that no one had expected, not even herself. It was a kiss that felt out of place, foreign, and yet in that instant, it was all she could do to fulfill the task that had been set before her. The room erupted into gasps, the collective shock of the guests echoing in her ears. Emily's eyes widened in disbelief. The smile that had once been bright and innocent was replaced by a look of utter confusion. Sarah quickly pulled away, her mind racing with regret and disbelief. She couldn't believe what she had just done. As Sarah turned to glance at Emily, the bride stood motionless, frozen in place, her face a mixture of shock, hurt, and confusion. The realization hit Sarah like a physical blow. The trust that had once existed between them was shattered, and nothing could ever repair it. She could already feel the distance growing between them, the gap that she had created with that one, fleeting kiss. But it was too late. The kiss had been sealed. The moment had passed. And with it, the weight of betrayal pressed down on Sarah's chest, suffocating her with its heaviness. Emily, still standing at the altar, looked lost. Sarah could see the hurt in her eyes, the questioning gaze that seemed to beg for an explanation that Sarah couldn't give. But what could she say? How could she explain the unexplainable? There was no justification for her actions, no excuse for what she had done. The silence in the room grew thick, pressing down on Sarah like a physical weight. It felt as though the entire world had stopped, leaving her alone in the midst of her own guilt. She couldn't meet Emily's eyes, couldn't bear to see the confusion and pain that she had caused. There was nothing left to say. Nothing that could undo what had just happened. Without a word, Sarah turned away, her legs unsteady beneath her. She couldn't stay in that room any longer. The pressure was too much. As the guests murmured, still shocked by the unexpected turn of events, Sarah ran from the altar, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't look back, couldn't bring herself to. The wedding had come to an abrupt halt. The air that had once been filled with joy and celebration now felt heavy, suffocating. The priest, startled by Sarah's sudden departure, stood frozen for a moment before attempting to continue with the ceremony. But it was clear that nothing would be the same. The atmosphere had shifted. The guests, still whispering amongst themselves, could sense the tension, the confusion that had replaced the joy of the occasion. Mr. James seized the moment, stepping forward with a cold authority that seemed to command the room. "This wedding can't continue," he said, his voice steady but filled with an undeniable finality. The guests, still in shock from the unexpected kiss, now exchanged nervous glances, unsure of what was happening. Emily, her face pale and tear-streaked, looked at Ben with a mix of confusion and disbelief. She didn't understand what was going on, why Sarah had done what she did, why her father had interfered in the most important moment of her life. She felt like she was drowning in a sea of unanswered questions. Her hands shook as she looked at Ben, searching for any kind of explanation, but Ben, equally bewildered, could only stare back at her, helpless. Without a word, Emily turned and stormed down the aisle, her wedding dress trailing behind her like a cloud of despair. Her steps were fast, determined, almost as if she were trying to outrun the chaos of the moment, the questions she didn't have the answers to. Ben rushed after her, calling her name, but she didn't stop. "Emily, please. I had no idea what was going on," he begged, his voice desperate. "I swear, I didn't know." But Emily didn't listen. She couldn't hear him over the storm raging inside her. As she reached the end of the aisle, she ran straight into the arms of her father. Mr. James, still seething with anger, looked at Ben with contempt, his expression cold and unforgiving. "How dare you embarrass my family like this?" he thundered, his hand rising and landing with a resounding slap across Ben's face. The sound echoed through the hall, sharp and final. Ben stood there for a moment, stunned, his face stinging from the blow. He had no idea how everything had spiraled out of control so quickly. One moment, he was marrying the woman he loved, and the next, his world had been turned upside down. What had Sarah been involved in? Why was her betrayal so deep? And why did it all happen in front of everyone? Emily, her face now streaked with tears, turned and fled from the church, her father at her side, guiding her out of the chaos. Ben stood in the middle of the hall, completely lost. The wedding was over. There was no way to salvage it. As the last of the guests murmured their goodbyes and left, Ben stood alone, his mind racing, his heart heavy with confusion. He had been a part of something far more complicated than he could have ever imagined. What had just happened? He kept asking himself. But no answers came. All he knew was that Emily was gone, and nothing would ever be the same. Sarah had taken the first cab she could find, desperate to escape the wreckage she had left behind. Her hands trembled as she slid into the back seat, and the tears that had been welling up in her eyes finally broke free, cascading down her cheeks. She didn't want to think, didn't want to feel. The reality of what she had done hit her like a wave, forceful and unforgiving. "Just drive," she murmured to the cab driver, her voice breaking with emotion. "Take me anywhere, just keep driving." The driver, sensing the weight of her distress, said nothing as he started the car. He turned onto the road, and Sarah stared out the window, barely noticing the streets she passed. Her mind raced with thoughts of Emily, of Ben, and the catastrophic mess she had created in that one foolish moment. She couldn't erase the look on Emily's face, the confusion, the hurt. She couldn't erase the way Ben had stood there, bewildered, helpless, as everything around them fell apart. Her pulse quickened as the reality of her betrayal settled in. She had kissed Ben. The groom. The man who was supposed to marry Emily, the one person Sarah had promised to protect, to stand by. But instead, she had hurt her. She had betrayed Emily's trust in a way that could never be repaired. And for what? Money. A fleeting sense of relief from the crushing burden of debt and responsibility. What had it all been worth? The cab sped down the road, past the familiar cityscape, the lights of the city slowly fading behind her. She barely noticed the passing scenery. All she could focus on was the endless ache in her chest, the guilt that suffocated her, the shame that clung to her like a second skin. The driver turned onto a winding road that led out of the city, toward the coast. Sarah hadn't specified where she wanted to go. She just needed distance. She needed to be far away from everything that reminded her of the disaster she had caused. Somewhere quiet. Somewhere she could disappear into the background, away from the eyes that had watched her fall apart. The cab finally came to a stop near the beach, a secluded spot where the only sound was the gentle crash of waves against the shore. Sarah didn't look at the driver as she paid him and got out of the car. She stepped onto the sand, her feet sinking into the cool, wet grains. The sound of the ocean was soothing, almost hypnotic, but it did nothing to calm the storm raging inside her. She walked along the shore, her eyes blurred with tears, the salty breeze mingling with the salt on her skin. The beach was empty, and she welcomed the solitude, even though it felt like a prison. She wanted to escape her thoughts, to escape the consequences of her actions, but there was no running from them. No matter how far she went, the guilt would follow. As she gazed out at the horizon, where the dark ocean met the endless sky, Sarah realized that she could run as far as she wanted, but there would be no escaping the mess she had created. She had to face it. She had to face Emily, face Ben, face herself. But for now, she let the waves wash over her feet, the cool water lapping at her toes as she stood there, lost in the vastness of the ocean. And in that moment, all she wanted was to disappear into the sea, into the horizon, into the silence of the night. But deep down, she knew that escape wasn't an option. The only thing she could do now was face the consequences and try, somehow, to make things right. Ben sat in his room, the silence around him oppressive. The wedding was supposed to be the beginning of something beautiful, the start of a new chapter in his life with Emily. But instead, it had ended in the most awkward, unexpected way imaginable. The shockwaves of what had happened reverberated far beyond the church walls. The whispers had already begun, spreading like wildfire across the internet and through the media. How a chief bridesmaid kissed the groom, the headlines screamed. Affair rumors swirl after wedding disaster. Ben stared blankly at his phone, the notifications pinging incessantly with messages and comments from friends and strangers alike. Some claimed they were having an affair, others speculated about the nature of the kiss, but no one truly knew the truth. And that truth was something Ben couldn't even begin to explain. His mind raced, images of Emily's face flashing in his thoughts. He couldn't shake the hurt that weighed on his chest, the feeling of betrayal, even though he knew he had done nothing wrong. He had no idea what was going on. He had been blindsided by Sarah's kiss, caught in the middle of a situation that made no sense. He wanted to tell Emily the truth, to convince her that he had nothing to do with it, that he had no part in whatever this mess was. But how could he get her to believe him when everything had spiraled out of control so quickly? Ben dropped his phone on the bed, running a hand through his hair in frustration. His thoughts turned to Sarah, the woman who had caused all this chaos. Why had she done it? Why had she kissed him, in front of everyone, without any warning or explanation? There was no excuse for it, no reason that made sense. But one thing was clear: she had been involved in this from the start, and now it was up to him to find out why. He stood up from the bed and walked over to the window, looking out at the city below. The night was dark, the streets quiet, but inside him, everything was chaos. The last few hours had been a whirlwind of confusion, hurt, and unanswered questions. And yet, amidst the storm of emotions, one thing became undeniable. He needed to find Sarah. He couldn't just sit around and let this mystery fester. The rumors, the accusations, it was all too much. But more than anything, he needed to clear his name with Emily. He had to make her see the truth, even if it meant finding Sarah and getting some answers. Ben's jaw tightened with resolve. No matter what it took, he was going to find her. He was going to find the woman who had kissed him at his wedding and ruined everything, and he was going to get to the bottom of it. He didn't know where to start, but he would search until he found her. She was the key to everything, and he wouldn't rest until he understood why she had done what she did. Whatever it took, he would get the answers he needed. In that moment, as he stared out at the dark city, Ben made a promise to himself. He would find Sarah. And when he did, everything would finally make sense. No more uncertainty. No more confusion. He was going to find the truth, even if it meant confronting the mess he had never wanted to be a part of.